to order. Welcome, everyone. I note that a quorum is present. I also note for the subcommittee that Ms. Stefanik of New York and Mr. Comer of Kentucky are permitted to participate in today's hearing with the understanding that their questions will come only after all members of this subcommittee on both sides of the aisle who are present have had an opportunity to question the witnesses. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on a call to action, Modernizing the Community Services Block Grant. This is an entirely remote hearing, and as such, the committee's hearing room is officially closed. All microphones will be kept muted as a general rule to avoid unnecessary background noise. Members and witnesses will be responsible for unmuting themselves when they are recognized to speak or when they wish to seek recognition. If a member or witness experiences technical difficulties during the hearing, please stay connected on the platform, make sure you're muted, use your phone to immediately call the committee's IT director whose number was provided in advance. Should the chair experience a technical difficulty or need to step away, another majority member is hereby authorized to assume the gavel in the chair's absence. To ensure that the committee's 5-minute rule is adhered to, which sometimes is challenging, staff will be keeping track of time using the committee's digital timer, which appears in its own thumbnail picture. Members and witnesses are asked to wrap up promptly once their time has expired. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, opening statements are limited to the chair and the ranking member. I recognize myself now for the purpose of making an opening statement. Today, we're examining the role of the Community Services Block Grant Program in our national and local efforts to reduce poverty. Poverty in America is persistent and complex epidemic that directly or indirectly affects everyone across the country. Yet we know poverty can look very different from one community to another. On the important issues of hunger, homelessness, and inadequate access to affordable health care, each of our communities grapple with unique circumstances when it comes to supporting our fellow Americans in need. As policymakers, we may not always have the same views about the causes of or exact solutions to the many ways in which poverty manifests, but I'm confident that we can agree that efforts to end poverty are best led by those in those families find their path out of poverty. Many CAAs are central pillars of their communities. They administer programs like Head Start to provide quality early childhood education to low-income children and to support their families. Meals on Wheels to support seniors experiencing hunger and isolation, and LIHEAP, the low-income home energy assistance program that helps people keep their utilities on. In the fiscal year 2019, CAAs helped 9 million individuals. Mr. Mervin, you need to mute. Thank you. More than 5 million families secure economic stability, meaningful employment and education, adequate housing, and much more. In my home state of Oregon, CAAs were able to serve more than 14,000 people who lacked health care, 43,000 individuals who reported having a disability, 21,000 senior citizens, 83,000 children living in poverty, and 8,200 veterans. To be clear, eradicating the multi-generational consequences of concentrated poverty is much greater than any one program. Yet for people across the country, CAAs continue to be a reliable and essential source of assistance during times of economic prosperity or downturn, and particularly during national emergencies. The COVID-19 pandemic has underscored the importance of CAAs and the Community Services Block Grant Program. Last year, at the start of the pandemic, CAAs were among the first to provide food and emergency support to those in need. And now these entities are playing a key role in conducting vaccine education and outreach, and helping low-income families access broadband and digital devices, distributing rental assistance, and preventing households from losing water and heating. Despite consistent bipartisan support for the Community Services Block Grant, Congress has not reauthorized this program since 1998. That was when Google was founded and John Glenn was on the Space Shuttle Discovery. It's been a long time. Yet over the past decade, CAAs have had to do far more with increasingly fewer resources, even while they face unique challenges providing critical services. As we recover from a historic global health pandemic, we have an opportunity, and I submit a responsibility, to renew our bipartisan commitment to providing struggling Americans with direct and meaningful support that will help them through challenging times and importantly, show them a path out of poverty. With the help of our witnesses, we will discuss bipartisan legislation that I've introduced with Representatives G.T. Thompson, Betty McCollum, Elise Stefanik, Mark Desaulnier, and James Comer, and many other co-sponsors to modernize and reauthorize the Community Service Block Grant. I thank each of my colleagues for joining in this significant endeavor and appreciate that several of them are joining this hearing today to highlight the importance of updating the CSBG program. I also want to thank my staff, Jack Arriaga, and the committee staff on both sides of the aisle who have worked so hard to get to this point today. Our bill, the Community Services Block Grant Modernization Act of 2021, will reauthorize CSBG for 10 years, the longest period in its history, and make long overdue improvements to the program, including strengthening funding for community action agencies, expanding access to their services, and streamlining collaboration between the federal government, states, and local entities. Poverty is not inevitable in this country. Today, I'm hopeful that we can find common ground and discuss the shared policy goals we must realize to help those in need and to help them improve their lives. I want to thank our witnesses again, and I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Fulcher, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For decades, the Community Services Block Grant, or CSBG, program has empowered civil institutions and local governments to serve low-income individuals and communities. Congress has not reauthorized the CSBG since 1998, and I think it's safe to say that our economy has changed tremendously over the past 2 decades to warrant a closer look at the program. We have an opportunity before us today to examine areas of the CSBG program that need to be reformed, and we need to consider ways to strengthen it. It's our job to make sure this program operates as effectively as possible. In addition to adding a greater accountability to low-income community members and taxpayers, we should look for ways to reduce unnecessary bureaucracy, encourage innovation, and ensure policymakers have essential information about how the program meets the needs of low-income Americans, helping them to move forward to stability, opportunity, and self-reliance. We should not be content to have vulnerable, low-income, and impoverished Americans remain locked in their current economic position. Neither should we be content to leave federal programs as is, simply because it's easier than improving them. Our programs to help those in need, including CSBG, should all be focused on helping to raise individuals out of poverty and move them into the workforce. One important way we can transform these programs is through a greater focus on outcomes. We need measurable outcomes from our federal safety net programs. Our safety net exists to assist those who are most in need, but reforms need to be made to ensure they work for the people they are intended to serve. A greater emphasis on program performance will ensure that federal anti-poverty programs are successfully helping individuals move out of poverty and toward self-sufficiency. Lastly, as we re-examine CSBG and other social safety net programs, we must protect faith-based providers. Faith-based organizations and charitable nonprofits have been a backbone of our country's efforts to serve those in poverty since our nation's founding. Faith-based organizations provide greatly needed material resources to low-income Americans, but they are also uniquely positioned to provide relational capital and spiritual support to them as well. Helping individuals out of poverty requires more than just material aid. Faith-based organizations work tirelessly every day to serve Americans living in poverty and support their general well-being. Undermining the right of faith-based organizations to operate in accord with their conscience harms the tradition of charity that strengthens our communities. Faith-based providers should be able to participate in government programs without having to change how they live out their faith. With all showing due respect for one another, we must protect the rights of religious organizations to hire employees in accordance with their faith. There are more than 19,000 religious organizations that participate in the CSBG program. Their absence would create an enormous service gap. It's our responsibility to make our nation's anti-poverty programs the best they can be. We can do this by encouraging modernization and innovation, as well as transparency and accountability. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today on how we can transform this program into one that helps impoverished Americans achieve. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Fulcher. And without objection, all other members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. on November 17th, 2021. I will now introduce the witnesses. David Bradley is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Community Action Foundation, which has for more than 40 years represented the funding and policy interests of the nation's 1,000 community action agencies before Congress and the executive branch. And we're fortunate to have him with us today. Sharon Scott Chandler is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Action for Boston Community Development, Inc., where she oversees ABCD's wide array of human services programs. Clarence H. Carter is the Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Human Services, having previously served as the Director of the Office of Family Assistance and Acting Director of the Office of Community Services within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from May of 2017 through January of 2021. And finally, Catherine King Galion is the Director of Family and Community Resources at Community Action in Washington County, Oregon, where she oversees a range of programs helping low-income families and individuals in Washington County prevent and end crisis and move towards stability and economic security. To the witnesses, we appreciate you for participating today, and we look forward to your testimony. Your written statements will appear in full in the hearing record. You're asked to limit your oral presentation to a 5-minute summary. Then after your presentation, we will move to member questions. The witnesses are aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee, and therefore we will proceed with their testimony. I will first recognize David Bradley. Mr. Bradley, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony. You need to unmute, David.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bonamici and Ranking Member Fulcher, also full committee Chair Scott and Ranking Member Dr. Fox. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the Community Services Block Grant and this important legislation. This is the first hearing on the Community Services Block Grant in about 18 years. It is a very important hearing for the program to update you on progress made, but also to reinforce and recommend I think adjustments that need to make in our current legislation. Let me put into context the reason we have a Community Services Block Grant in 1981. It was created. I was involved with creating that program, and there was a recognition, bipartisan recognition in Congress, including by the Education and Labor Committee, but is now the Senate Health Committee, that a national network of community action agencies, anti-poverty agencies, primarily private nonprofit, was of value in assisting the poor and delivering opportunity and hope. We could not, and there was not a consensus, a majority consensus, to save a federal-local relationship, which existed up from 64 to 81, but there was interest in a Community Services Block Grant support for community action agencies. Since then, since 1981, bipartisan support, growing recognition of the value of this network has grown steadily over the years. And today, community action agencies are very much a vital part of our communities and of our response to the needs of low-income families and individuals, and as I said, communities. CSBG, when it was created, recognized and supported a community action agency network that has some commonalities. One, it is every community action agency, private, nonprofit, has a tripartite board with low-income participation, local elected officials, and a broad array of partners from the community, including faith-based. Second is that the Community Services Block Grant enabled our agencies to be comprehensive, flexible, responsive, and coupled with the needs assessment that every agency is required to do, really directive on services and assistance needed to make the largest impact in their community. And with our public-private partnerships and with the money that the community services funding that community services block grant leverages, we're able to stretch that federal investment far beyond just the dollars put in the community services block grant. So that recognition was there in 1981 and has continued to grow. And this national network of community action agencies that are united and supported by the community services block grant, having that network enabled, for instance, Governor DeWine to allocate $554 million on rental and mortgage assistance, combining programs to the Community Action Network, because it was in place, all with a similar mission. He used them, he turned to them because he knew that they had the accountability, they had the knowledge, they had the familiarity with the problems and the needs of low-income communities. So it funds a national network of community action agencies, and each of these community action agencies has, as I said, has tripartite board. They do quality needs assessment. They deliver and provide assistance from almost cradle to grave throughout the community. They have incredible partnerships. Congressman Fulcher, I looked at in Idaho, our agency's relationship with faith-based in your district, over 100 partnerships. So these partnerships, public-private partnerships, familiarity with other nonprofits, with local government officials has been very, very strong. So I'm running over time, but I'd like at some point to be able to tell you the good things in this bill and how it reflects, I think, where the program should go.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I'm sure there will be time in the questions. Next, I recognize Sharon Scott Chandler for 5 minutes for your testimony. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Scott Chandler, and I'm the Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer at Action for Boston Community Development, ABCD. To Subcommittee Chairwoman Bonamici and Ranking Member Fulcher, Full Committee Chairman Scott, and Ranking Member Dr. Fox, and the rest of the committee members, thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony on behalf of ABCD and our sister community action agencies across the country. Thank you also to the Chairwoman and Representative Thompson and others for introducing this critical legislation to reauthorize and modernize the Community Services Block Grant. Community action agencies, which reach nearly every community in the United States, is the quiet but highly effective tool through which local residents work together to provide increased opportunity for their low-income neighbors. My organization, ABCD, is the largest private nonprofit community action agency in New England. We serve over 100,000 low-income residents in the greater Boston area each year, helping them to move from poverty to stability and from stability to success. The Community Services Block Grant, or CSBG, is at the core of this success. Its provisions ensure local leadership and a clear focus on self-determination and economic opportunity. Its flexible structure promotes innovation and leveraging of other resources, both public and private, allowing each community to develop unique solutions to fit local needs. It also ensures a high level of accountability for each community action agency through outcomes-based performance measurement and reporting. CSBG has been the backbone for ABCD for almost 60 years, leveraging critical resources, low-income households across Greater Boston. Let me offer a few examples. CSBG funding supports our 12 neighborhood service centers and a core of community-based programs. These are resources on the ground in each community where families in crisis can access through one door, a comprehensive set of programs that keep people out of poverty. Our centers operate food pantries, assist clients applying for SNAP and LIHEAP. We keep elders safe, healthy, and engaged. We facilitate workshops on computer literacy. We manage the volunteer income tax program. CSBG also supports ABCD's workforce development programs and our child care voucher management system, housing services, Head Start, and youth programming. These are the kinds of initiatives that give adults the education necessary to enter high demand industries and that have employed thousands of teens in their first job, laying the foundation for what they will need for lifelong employment. By allowing us to maintain critical resources, build partnerships, and develop new program models, CSBG leverages tens of millions of dollars annually. CSBG may even be more vital now than when it was established, given the complexities of poverty and the unprecedented challenges we face in the world today. This was never so evident than in the last 18 months of the COVID-19 crisis, where because of CSBG, we were able to impact over 200,000 people, giving them hope amidst fear and tragedy. ABCD immediately adapted its emergency services safely to respond early on in the crisis while many nonprofits and government entities remained closed. ABCD rapidly built a network of 20 community and faith-based partners, transforming initiatives to remote operation, distributing 3 million pounds of emergency food, and intervening to prevent homelessness for hundreds of households. We also created new public-private partnerships with PPE suppliers, restaurants, healthcare providers, and municipalities to meet the overwhelming health and socioeconomic needs in new ways. The core issues of poverty may look similar in our respective states, but the appropriate response delivered by each community action agency can and often does look very different. CSBG, through flexibility and innovation, has allowed the network to be able to meet those diverse needs. We have the opportunity to strengthen the impact of the Community Services Block Grant with judicious modernization laid out in this bill, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today and for your consideration.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And next I recognize Mr. Clarence H. Carter for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Fulcher, full Committee Chairman Scott, and Ranking Member Fox. My name is Clarence H. Carter. I serve as Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Human Services. I'm honored to speak with you today about my work with the Community Services Block Grant Program and the over 1,000 community action agencies funded through the block grant. My work with CSBG spans over nearly 3 decades while serving 2 presidents, 4 governors, and a mayor. I've had the blessing and good fortune to partner with community organizations dedicated to addressing the challenges of those in our society experiencing economic, social, and developmental vulnerabilities. My working relationship with CSBG has been a rewarding and spirited one. I've met and consider among my friends and partners leaders of several community action agencies. They are fierce poverty warriors doing some of the most innovative programming in this space. I want to clearly and unequivocally state for the record that it has been my lived professional experience that CSBG and the Community Action Network is a vital tool in the public effort to serve those Americans experiencing basic challenges to making their everyday lives work. Over these many years, what has made our relationship ebb and flow is that I am a change agent. Since very early in my work in this space, I have believed the public safety net is flawed in design and operation. I have dedicated my career to highlighting and addressing these flaws by proposing a new vision and construction for serving our vulnerable citizens. I've encouraged my partner, Community Action Network, to join me in this endeavor. I've openly shared this desire, and that has created some turbulence in our relationship. Allow me first to speak generally about what I believe are the flaws of our public safety net before turning to my hopes for CSBG and the transformation of the American safety net. Between federal and state government alone, America spends more than $1 trillion annually in over 80 programs that address every aspect of the human condition. Each program, while important in its individual objective, is not tied to any overarching vision for our nation. Our current safety net is not actually a system or net at all. Instead, we have a disparate set of individual benefits, goods, and services that operate as band-aids to certain human conditions. As a result, we measure success in the current system by focusing on outputs, how many units of services we provided, how quickly we process applications, and whether we provide every benefit, good, or service to every eligible individual or family. We take these measurements without considering the perspective of those served. In doing so, we fail to measure what I believe is the most important objective: growing those in need beyond their dependence on the benefits, goods, and services we provide. We believe the safety net should serve as a mile marker in a life's journey, not a destination unto itself. We instead should measure success by focusing on freeing those we serve from the life of basic survival to a life that allows them to create their own unique version of the American dream. I use the phrase growing capacity to reduce dependency. I would argue this should be the overarching vision, true north, and rallying cry for our American safety net. This would result in supporting our vulnerable citizens in ways that foster their growth of knowledge, skill, and independence from government supports. I would further argue that we don't leverage other sectors of American society in this vital work. The $1 trillion figure I referenced previously is public funding only. It does not account for $1 or 1 hour of time, talent, and treasure any number of sectors add to the equation. We don't combine our efforts and assets to ensure the whole American safety net is greater than the sum of its parts. Now back to CSBG and community action. The Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 created this network of national and locally focused organizations to lead the nation's conversation on the issues attendant to economic, social, and developmental vulnerability. During my 27-year relationship with community action, my hope has always been that they would partner with me to say, this emperor has no clothes, that our safety net, while absolutely essential to the vitality of our nation, is woefully flawed in its design and operation. My hope has been and remains that community action will speak out about the problem and work towards solving it. To be clear, the problem is not that we don't have enough funding or programs or people or heart to solve these vexing challenges. The problem is that we have no system at all. We don't leverage all of the American assets in pursuit of a shared vision to grow capacity and reduce dependency. Addressing poverty in America cannot be a problem left to the government to solve alone. I truly don't believe CSBG or
Excuse me,
any
Mr.
other
Carter,
system-
you are over time. If you wouldn't mind wrapping up, please.
Yes, ma'am. It's been my experience that CSBG and community action agencies are an invaluable tool in the toolbox of America's effort to serve those in our society experiencing economic, social, and developmental vulnerability. However, every tool in our toolbox, in fact, the toolbox itself demands a refresh. My critique here today is to call to action all of us to rethink, reimagine, and renew the collective American effort to serve our neighbors and build a society that provides true opportunity for all to thrive. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you. And I now recognize Catherine King Galion from my home state of Oregon for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bonamici, Ranking Member Fulcher, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Fox, and members of the House Education and Labor Committee. Thank you for holding today's hearing and allowing us the opportunity to talk about why HR 5129 is so important for the recovery and well-being of our communities. My name is Catherine King Galion, and I join you this morning from Washington County, Oregon, where I have been on staff at Community Action since 2002, and I'm currently the Director of Family and Community Resources. Today, I'm honored to share my perspective on the importance of this bill to solidify the role of CSBG, increase investment in this critical program, reinforce the emphasis on strategic planning at the local level, and permanently increase the income eligibility to 200% federal poverty level. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my community. We are a county of just over 600,000 people in 726 square miles on the west side of the Portland metro area. We have 12 cities, 7 school districts, and the most diverse people in Oregon. Our neighborhoods are urban, suburban, and rural. We have the highest median income in the state and 2 of the state's highest poverty census block groups. Those facts impact the lives of people here, how they may or may not experience conditions of poverty, and their access to opportunities. Through regular analysis of community needs and resources, intentional community engagement, and partnership building, our community action organization has helped build social infrastructure that grows thriving communities and provides permanent pathways out of poverty. Our deep community connections and longstanding partnerships were called upon as the health and economic crisis of COVID-19 hit our most vulnerable community members hardest. Using CSBG CARES Act funding, Community Action coordinated and expanded the capacity of a broad coalition of faith-based and culturally specific partners to respond to the needs of our most isolated and vulnerable community members. While CSBG funds are less than 2% of the agency budget, they allow us to leverage private, local, state, and federal investments and deploy them effectively to impact the lives of nearly 30,000 people each year. Our organization provides community-based programs across a variety of categories, including financial education, career coaching, utility assistance and weatherization, emergency shelter, housing, parenting supports, small business development, and early childhood education. Because of CSBG, we bridge each of these program areas and provide comprehensive supports that address the needs of the whole family. Families and individuals are more successful in their efforts to escape poverty when interventions are sequenced and coordinated in a way that reflects the realities of the human experience. I'd like to share one example of how this works in people's lives. Patricia lost her job in her home in the fall of 2019. For 6 years, she successfully supported herself and 3 children as a bartender in a hotel. But when hotel ownership changed, she lost her job. She couldn't afford rent and had to move in with friends, and she struggled to find stability. She became increasingly anxious and depressed. At Community Action, Patricia worked with a career coach who encouraged her to further her education and increase her earning potential. Patricia liked the idea of becoming a certified nursing assistant, CNA, but she was afraid the courses would be too hard. She did not have a strong educational foundation, and the idea of 6 weeks of classes to learn a new technical field was daunting. Her career coach was there with her every step of the way, starting with a resume. With her new resume in hand, Patricia applied to the Marquee Company CNA training program, interviewed, and was accepted, but she continued to face hurdles. What if they were evicted? How would she afford gas to travel 30 minutes every day for classes? What about scrubs and books? But because of CSBG, these barriers did not become roadblocks on her path to success. The classes were difficult and Patricia struggled, but her coach was a constant source of encouragement. If she felt tired or frustrated, her coach was there to say, "I know you can do it." And when she went on to proudly serve her coach right in February of 2020, she was successful in completing her course and hired full-time at Marquee Assisted Living. As the economic challenges of the pandemic continue to impact families, Patricia is grateful to be in a field in such high demand, and that kind of job security is a huge relief to her. Thank you for believing in people like Patricia. Because of CSBG, she has a job that she loves and a newfound confidence. She says, "Who knows, maybe when I'm 60, I'll be a doctor." By permanently raising the income eligibility to 200%, people like Patricia can continue on the path she has worked so hard for. As a CNA working full-time at $22 an hour, she is under 200% federal poverty level for her family of 4, and her hard-won stability is tenuous. Rent, childcare, transportation costs leave no margin for error in her monthly budget. An illness, a car repair, or an unexpected expense can derail her progress. With this change, Patricia can continue to receive support, move forward on her goals, and leave a life of insecurity behind for good. People's experiences of poverty are as unique and diverse as our community. Like roads, bridges, and schools, CSBG is what connects an often fragmented set of investments into a cohesive system of pathways of opportunity for people. Passage of this bill ensures that our low-income individuals and families are centered as we rebuild to a new normal and for years to come. Thank you again for your time and consideration of this bill.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Under Committee Rule 9A, we will now question the witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I will be recognizing subcommittee members in seniority order. As chair, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Galion, thank you again for your insightful testimony. As you noted, Washington County, which happens to be in the district I'm honored to represent, the communities you serve are from urban to rural, include a wide range of socioeconomic levels. We have companies like Nike, Intel, Genentech there that employ thousands in good paying jobs. But as you also noted, you serve families in 2 of our state's highest poverty census blocks. So can you please talk about how Community Action's annual needs assessment helps you meet the most urgent challenges of those you serve?
Yes, thank you very much for your question, Congressman Bonamici. First, we hear directly from our community about what's most important to them. And we're able to focus our interventions around their priorities. We're not guessing or developing interventions based on what funding is available. We're responding to community input and putting the pieces together in a way that work for the folks based on the needs and resources where they live specifically. Place matters quite a bit in terms of how interventions function. We are able to be incredibly specific. What is needed in a town like Beaverton is very different from what is needed in Forest Grove or Banks, in terms of one, who the community is, and two, what access they have to opportunities. And we share those findings widely so that we're able to stay as a community focused on the math problem, build consensus, and share information about what is happening in each of the neighborhoods. And that means that we aren't the only ones that are having to, or that are working on interventions. We're working with a broad coalition of people.
Thank you. And again, for Ms. Galion, like many federal programs, CSBG uses the federal poverty level to determine eligibility, specifically allowing states to serve individuals up to 125% of FPL. But during the pandemic, as you noted, the CARES Act temporarily allowed states the option of serving individuals up to 200%, with most states eagerly taking advantage of that option to help more people. So this flexibility was recently extended, as I noted, but it's not permanent. So you told the story about Patricia, which I found very compelling. Why should a family living at 150 or 200% of the federal poverty level in Northwest Oregon or elsewhere be eligible for CSBG? And what has this flexibility meant for community action and your ability to serve them? And would you recommend that this flexibility be made permanent as our economy continues to recover from the pandemic?
Absolutely, I would recommend that this flexibility may be made permanent. People experience conditions of poverty, things like not being able to afford basic needs at incomes up to 200, in some situations 300% of federal poverty level. This flexibility has meant that we're able to kind of dole the cliff effect for families and provide some security for them as they work towards permanent stability. For folks like Patricia, a $600 car repair can mean a choice between paying rent or keeping a job. The key to maximize it, it's also the key to maximizing impact of the investments in sequencing and alignment. So programs that have income eligibility up to 80% of area median income in Washington County. So with CSBG having a similar eligibility level, we're able to do that alignment and sequencing of interventions and make them all more effective together.
Thank you. And in the remaining a little more than a minute, I want to ask the same question to Ms. Scott Chandler and Mr. Bradley. Would you recommend that this flexibility be made permanent as our economy continues to recover from the pandemic? Ms. Scott Chandler and Mr. Bradley.
Absolutely. As Catherine said, housing is one of the biggest challenges in our region. And on average, a one-bedroom apartment is $2,000. And at 125%, their monthly income is just over $2,200. So it really does leave our families and our elders and everyone on the edge. I mean, they are trading paying for medication, paying for life-saving equipment, for rent and other things. And so allowing the 200% of poverty to continue captures those individuals and families.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. It's the hardworking low-income families that fall between 125 and 200%. It's easier to help assist, get them back on their feet when they're first falling and when they plummet all the way down and have so many mountains to climb to get back to self-sufficiency. 200% in CARES Act, 200% in ARA, 200% in regular appropriations has proved invaluable for allowing these agencies.
And thank you. And I'm going to try to set a good example and yield back. And now I recognize Ranking Member Fulcher for 5 minutes for your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And a question for Mr. Carter, if I may, please. Mr. Carter, one of the things that is omitted in this bill is to me a very critical one, and that's the financial participation of faith-based organizations. And can you talk for just a little bit about what makes faith-based organizations unique in the way they serve low-income Americans compared to the government, how the government does it, and why religious providers are critical to the effort to help those that are in need? Mr. Carter?
Mr. Ranking Member, thanks for the question. If it is our intention to grow individuals and families beyond their need for these supports. What is important is to combine transaction with relationship. The government is good at the transaction part. It's horrible at the relationship part. And we see the community of faith as being a faithful partner in that relationship. So you put transaction together with relationship, and that equals personal transformation. So we see them as an invaluable partner, along with other sectors of our society in serving economically, socially, and developmentally vulnerable individuals and families.
Mr. Carter, I can just hear is one person's perspective that I believe substantiates your comments about government not being the best at relations all the time. I think right now as a Congress, we are struggling with our relations. And so thank you for your comment there. On a related note, follow up, Mr. Carter. There's also a restriction under the proposed changes that would prevent religious organizations from being able to hire employees according to their faith. Could you comment on that? That is, if they were receive the program funds, of course, which is very important. And what kind of impact do you think that may have on the ability of those faith-based charities to fulfill their mission of serving low-income Americans?
I think that would actually undercut the core of what makes the community of faith what it is, if indeed we require them to disconnect employees from their faith in service to those neighbors in our community we're trying to serve. It is a difference between the idea of proselytizing in the service that is being provided, as opposed to me being allowed to have a representation of my faith as part of the work that I do. So I think that we wouldn't want to hollow out that which has the individual part of that faith community as a part of their service.
Mr. Carter, thank you for that. Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Fulcher. Next, I recognize Dr. Adams for 5 minutes for your questions. You are still on mute, Representative Adams.
Okay, can you hear me now, Madam Chair?
Now we can hear you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. To Chair Bonamici, thank you for your work on the Community Services Block Grant, and to the witnesses, thank you so much for being here. This pandemic has certainly put us in mind of all the various ways that our communities must pull together and support those most vulnerable. So I'm glad to see that this program is being modernized and that it also has a bipartisan undertaking. I've known about community action for a long time. We've had great community action programs in my state, but community action agencies are a trusted resource in their communities, and as such, they've played a key role in addressing health equity issues during the COVID-19 pandemic. They've tackled disparities in their communities by funding cultural and language-appropriate outreach and education for underserved and at-risk community members. Mr. Scott Chandler, CEO Scott Chandler, can you both talk about the community partnerships that your organizations have joined to address health equity issues and support COVID-19 prevention efforts? So, CEO Scott.
Thank you for the opportunity to answer the question. ABCD has a long-standing commitment to reducing racial, ethnic, and economic health disparities through many of its peer-driven community programs, health education, and we're widely recognized as national model. These concerns have been at the forefront during the recent public health crisis, as you've mentioned, and recognizing that gaps in information and access and trust have severely compromised the ability of low-income neighborhoods, especially hours to protect themselves from the impacts of COVID-19. And we utilized CSBG resources to bridge those gaps. It allowed us to bring accurate COVID-19 information to communities. We undertook a comprehensive public information campaign early on in the pandemic using multiple avenues of communication, social media, print, electronic, neighborhood level outreach to communicate reliable information and to promote prevention and testing and vaccination. We provide all of our information in linguistically, culturally appropriate ways. We reflect the communities that we serve. About 75% of our community that we serve are of color and speak 40 different languages. And our staff and our leadership reflect that same demographic. And so we are able to communicate and be trusted by the communities who we've been serving for over 60 years. We also supported delivery of personal protection equipment and helped many folks get to testing sites and vaccination sites over these last 18 months.
Thank you. So we know that communities of color have faced systemic disadvantages in energy costs, supply, as well as access to renewable energy resources and energy efficient technologies. Community action agencies play a critical role in helping these families access public benefits, including low-income home energy assistance program. So how crucial is this outreach by the CAAs in informing and assisting families of color in accessing energy assistance? Ms. Scott Chandler?
Okay. Yes, as you mentioned, many of our communities of color are spending far too much on energy-related costs and do not even know they are eligible for assistance. And so our outreach in multiple languages, materials in multiple language is critical for us to reach people in communities. It's critical that we be intentional and inclusive. As I mentioned, we're a trusted community resource, and we work with faith-based partners. We work with other CBOs to reach people where they are in all communities. And we're mindful of the communication mediums and the gaps with internet and social media. Everyone is getting information and by technology these days. We have to help our communities access broadband, access computers and technology. This is the type of outreach that we do, and it sends a message that we offer programs that people can trust and want to engage in.
Thank you. I've only got about 10 seconds left, so Madam Chair, I'm going to yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. And next, I welcome to the hearing and recognize for 5 minutes for your questions, Congressman Thompson. Thank you for joining us. You're recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Much appreciated. And thank you for this this hearing on a topic that I've always been very passionate about. We're talking about the original anti-poverty programs, one of the best forms of a public-private partnership that I know of. And it addresses poverty no matter what the root cause of poverty is. So trying to prevent it and raise people out of poverty. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here today and giving us the opportunity to talk about the only federal program with the explicit goal of reducing poverty, and that's the Community Services Block Grant. As you all know, CSBG traces its roots back more than 50 years ago to the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. The act was established local community action agencies to help identify why people were not in poverty and how to address it using public and private partnerships. Now, virtually every county in America has a community action agency, which act as a safety net for low-income individuals and families. But even more importantly, they help create opportunities for people to move from poverty to prosperity, to independence. Unfortunately, this program has not been reauthorized in nearly 25 years. That's why my colleague, Representative Bonamici, and I introduced H.R. 5129, the Community Services Block Grant Modernization Act. Now, specifically, this bill reauthorizes CSBG program for 10 years at an annual level of $1 billion for the first 5 years. It permanently raises the program's income eligibility to 200% of poverty line, which was temporarily provided in the CARES Act. It maintains local control of community action planning and activities, and it authorizes a broadband navigator program to respond to the broadband and digital needs of low-income families and communities, and much more. So CSBG requires some modernization to allow awarded organizations the ability to tap their full potential and better serve families and communities. And this program has a strong history of bipartisan support because of the great work it enables. Mr. Bradley, thank you for being here and being such a strong advocate for our community action agencies. Your testimony provided us a snapshot of the history of CSBG, its positive impacts, and the need to modernize. Can you elaborate more on how Community Services Block Grant Program effectively lifts individuals and communities out of poverty and puts them on the pathway of opportunity?
Well, thank you, Congressman Thompson, for that question. The Community Services Block Grant is absolutely essential to allow community action agencies, number one, to run a variety of programs that address multiple causes, that allow them to address multiple causes that may put families in poverty, that may prevent them from achieving self-sufficiency. So that's number one. Number two, our agencies are absolutely trusted, reliable institutions in the community. So they know from all the partnerships, they know from the local elected officials what that community needs, what those family needs to help them get out of poverty or to stabilize their life. Three is that the Community Services Block Grant allows these agencies to leverage so much of non-federal resources to help those families address poverty. And then in addition, and you mentioned broadband, in addition, the Community Services Block Grant allows our agencies to be on the cutting edge of addressing significant problems impacting low-income families, one being the broadband initiative that you're so involved with. So there is, whether it is hunger, whether it's nutrition, whether it's transportation, whether it's job education, language skills, health, our agencies running from multiple of services and assistance are able to address the needs of the low-income community.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I can't see the clock. Can I inquire?
You have another 31 seconds.
All right. Well, Mr. Carter, you've had a long history working with the program. Your testimony, you talked about reforms you'd like to see, and I agree that we need to modernize and provide accountability measures. Can you elaborate just briefly on how you see these measures working for accountability?
Actually, I think our principal accountability should be, did the benefit, good, or service that we offered, did it grow that individual or that family beyond their need for those supports? So right now we measure a lot of process and outputs. I can tell you how many units of service that we provided. What I can't tell you is, did we lift that individual or that family beyond their need for these supports? And so there is a very robust system of accountability already in the network. I would ask that we enhance that by looking at the ultimate impact. Did we increase assets? Did we increase credentials? Did we reduce bad debt? Did we reduce the need for that individual or family to rely on these public supports?
And Mr. Carter, Mr. Thompson's time has expired, and I want to, as I turn it over to the next member for questioning, I just want to thank Mr. Thompson for your co-sponsorship, but also your contributions, especially with the broadband navigation, great contributions to the bill. And now I recognize Representative Hayes for 5 minutes for your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing. As Democrats put the final touches on a transformational bill to help lift American families, we must also look to a program that has a proven track record in the fight against poverty. In Connecticut, Community Services Block Grants are used by community action agencies to provide wraparound support in almost every city and town. The community action agencies in 9 of the towns that I represent have served 107,000 families and 260,000 individuals, helping over 81,000 households avoid crisis with energy assistance, and nearly 17,000 people avoid hunger with emergency or supplemental food. Community action agencies in Connecticut have also enrolled 5,600 children in early childcare services. In my district, we are serviced by Community Action Agency of Western Connecticut, the Human Resources Agency of New Britain, and New Opportunities Incorporated in multiple locations. These agencies provide an avenue for residents to empower, shape, and transform their communities. My question today is for Mr. Bradley. Can you tell us about the unique concept of maximum feasible participation in CSGB, which requires low-income residents to have a seat at the table in the design, implementation, and administration of programs which serve their communities?
Short answer is yes, I can. I thank you for the question. Maximum feasible participation was one of the more controversial phrases incorporated in the Community Action Program and the Economic Opportunity Act in 1964. It was originally phrased maximum participation, and it was watered down during the deliberation of the task force that wrote the Economic Opportunity Act. What it implies is that different than any other federal program at that time, the poor were going to be involved in planning, administering, evaluating. They're going to get an opportunity to buy in and share their vision, their concerns, their desire for opportunity. And the more that the low income population was able to participate in this, the more they're going to support it and take advantage, meaning use it to lift themselves out of poverty. Over time, that maximum feasible participation is now seen as empowerment, as a piece of democracy in our low-income communities, widely popular on both sides. This is the phrase in the program and the opportunity to allow low-income families and individuals to help shape their destiny because they're at the table. It is critical to defining what this program is all about.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. I have engaged just in a really thoughtful way with the agencies in my district. And one of the things that I think that we really have to stress is, although these programs provide support for people, the ultimate goal is to empower people to get back to work, to be productive members of society. So following up on the question that Ms. Adams was asking for Ms. Scott Chandler, are there ways that community action agencies can be better supported to continue engaging low income and historically disadvantaged households? I mean, the programs exist, but I feel like the base has to be expanded so that more people know what's available and how we can provide services to bridge the gaps that they're seeing.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that we did with the CARES Act funding was to, I think I mentioned before, partner with 20 other organizations. I think, no one can do it alone. No one organization can do it alone. And we are the convener, the trusted resource in the community. And so we were able to partner with all sorts of organizations to do outreach, to deliver services. That's how we on the ground can get to our communities. Again, our staff live and work in our communities. Word of mouth is often the trusted way of getting information about our services, but we are constantly trying to, through our community needs assessment, find out what people need, how they can get the information in the best way possible.
Thank you. My time has expired. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Hayes. Next, I recognize Representative Fitzgerald for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Chair. President Reagan once said we should measure welfare success by how many people leave welfare, not how many people are added. I wanted to just echo President Reagan's thoughts here. The federal safety net program should be used to help raise people out of poverty, not keep people dependent on government assistance. Mr. Carter, what can Congress do in order to help federal safety net programs become more effective at pulling individuals?
I appreciate the question. I would say begin with the intention of that objective. Part of the challenge of the design and operation of the system is that we are a disparate set of programs that don't have any kind of true north or overarching objective. So I would say that we begin by having that overarching objective of growing capacity to reduce dependency, and then using all of the safety net programs as supports to achieve that objective, as opposed to individual islands in and of themselves. So we begin with the intention that the system is about growing people beyond it, and then allowing for connectivity of the supports so that they can support that shared objective of growing people beyond their vulnerability.
Thank you. Just a follow-up. After President Clinton had embarked on the many changes that he wanted to make to welfare in America, it was up to the individual states oftentimes to come up with the innovative part. And I was part of the Wisconsin State Senate when Governor Tommy Thompson pulled together the Wisconsin Works program, W2. So with that being said, Mr. Carter, the structure of the CSBG program, it makes it difficult for innovative new partners to enter into the programs. It seems that one of the reasons for that is because states have little ability to redesignate the funds from any existing partners, and that was critical when we developed W2 in Wisconsin. Even if they're not performing well, you still need that ability. What reform should Congress consider to support more innovation and help remove the poor performers?
One, I like the idea of an innovation fund, which would specifically support partnerships between the Community Action Network and other sectors to be able to bring innovation into the system. And while we don't want to, in any kind of willy-nilly way, remove network service providers, there does need to be a rigorous standard in which we hold every entity that uses public money to serve the economically, socially, and developmentally vulnerable to account for doing so. And those that are unable to meet the mark, then we ought to be able to move on from them. I would add that when I first had this responsibility some 20 years ago, I asked David Bradley if he could introduce me to some of the best and brightest community action agencies. And his first recommendation was ABCD in Boston, where I had the opportunity to break bread with a champion in community action, Bob Court. And I saw there some of the most brilliant innovation that goes on in the network. And there is so much of that innovation, but with any other endeavor, there are those that excel and those that can't meet the mark. And we ought not to be afraid to move on from those that can't meet the mark.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Next, I recognize Representative Leger Fernandez for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you so much, Chair Bonamici and Ranking Member Fulcher. I really want to thank the witnesses, not just for being witnesses and lending their expertise today, but for the work they are doing in the communities to make a difference, to empower, as we just heard. There are so many programs that come out of this that are pretty exciting in terms of their focus on indeed what I think is outcome. I'm very pleased to be a co-sponsor for the Community Services Block Grant Modernization Act with Chair Bonamici. like one of the programs I think about is the Rural Community Development Program, which provides these grants to nonprofit organizations for rural housing and training, for technical assistance, and that supports the network that is needed to get safe drinking water and wastewater treatment facilities. Now we know it's also these essential infrastructure includes broadband, and we've added that. But Mr. Bradley, your written testimony, you had a little more time in that, and you were able to describe your support for the reauthorization and the fact that it strengthens community action principles of using needs assessment, strategic planning, and yes, partnerships, which we are hearing about the importance today. We know we're going to see new funding coming out of Washington to the states and communities in both the Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill. I really want to make sure that smaller rural poor communities will be able to access those funds. I don't want a nickel to stay in DC when it could be helping families on the ground in New Mexico and elsewhere. Can you describe to us how both the reauthorization and the principles and the work that's done will help, how CAAs could help communities access those funds?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. HR 5129, I think, is a critical element for the next part of our history, the ongoing history of this program. There's many things in there that to go through very, very quickly that will strengthen the program, that will, I think, help community action agencies function better, will highlight results. So let me go through very quickly things in this bill that are important to our communities. This bill adjusts the state minimum allocation. We did this 1989 and 1990. 12 small states were getting 1/4%. Congress, on a bipartisan basis, upped that to 1/2%, but in a way that no state was cut. There isn't a state in the country who said we have too much CSBG. They're saying we need more money. This bill will take this minimum state allocation from 1/2 to 3/4. And we know in rural communities, including in New Mexico, we know in rural communities, a lot of times the most important entity for local government, for other partnerships, for other nonprofits, for faith-based, is that community action agency. By giving them more resources, we're going to leverage far more dollars to help those low-income communities deal with the problems they're having. Broadband is probably too lengthy to answer at this point, but we also require this bill performance, federal, state, local. The federal entity needs, a federal Office of Community Services needs to get money out on time. This puts a 30-day threshold. We want states to get the money down locally in 30 days. All that helps the efficiency and the operation of these agencies. And then finally, one quick word on innovation. There is a lot of innovation going on locally in this program. We look at Head Start, you look at community health centers, on and on and on. Those programs started because the innovative DNA contained in community action agencies, that still exists. The problem is nobody knows about it. Fresno does something on gangs. No one knows it but them and maybe the state and myself. We create an innovation fund. It's only $8 million, but an innovation fund to help us evaluate and replicate if necessary, but do due diligence on a lot of innovative ideas. So I think this bill in total is going to strengthen community action agencies all across the country, and with more resources in the rural areas, they're going to continue to be the vital entity that those communities rely on. Okay.
Thank you and so much. And, I want to go, Ms. King-Galion, I wanted to go back to the point about measuring success by looking at outcome. When I listened to Patricia's story, that was about outcome. Her life was changed. Can you describe how you look at that issue, not just about Patricia's, but in the entire work that you do, is in terms of how you're measuring what you're doing? Because clearly you brought to us a story of how a life was changed. And therefore, the family's life was changed, the children's life, their outcome is going to be different. Can you describe a little bit more about how do you believe that's already baked in to what CAAs do?
I do. Obviously, in a situation like Patricia's, multiple programs came together to provide what she needed, and we're measuring outcomes for each of those individual investments, the education outcomes, housing supports, childcare supports, and also the combined impact of all of that on moving Patricia and her family out of poverty. So we are looking at households increasing income, how many folks are moving from below 100% federal poverty level to over 100% federal poverty level, and bringing all of that together to measure both the incremental steps on the pathway to stability and those that reach stability as a whole.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much. And it looks like next we're going to go to Mr. Mervan. You're recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Bonamucci. Ms. Scott Chandler, during the pandemic, the CAAs, as well as businesses and other nonprofit partners, shifted to remote services. Where possible, and internet connectivity became a barrier to job seekers, seniors, and students, and others who did not have access. Can you discuss how the CSBG leveraged its resources to ensure community members remained as connected as possible? I believe you're still.
Yes, thanks. Thank you. To your point, I've been at ABCD for 22 years, and the change in how we do our work and how families access services and understand services is astounding. The digital divide existed before it. The starkness with which that reared its ugly head during the pandemic is just tremendous. And CSBG Cares allowed us to jump into action to get to computers to folks, whether it was seniors, whether it was youth or displaced workers, folks who needed computers to when their employment went remote, so they could communicate and stay connected to every part of life, to understand what was happening with the health and the economic. But it was not just technology that was needed. So we had to support broadband and pay for internet costs. We had to troubleshoot folks, and we had a call center, a call line where we could help individuals not only with services and with necessities, but also, how do I deal with this? How do I access this? We went remote. All of our services, emergency services, were able to be accessed online. So we created virtual platforms so that people could still apply for LIHEAP and SNAP and utilize ESOL. Even our Head Start programs used virtual classrooms. So we were able to, with CSBG and leveraging, to really help people in a way that we would never have been able to do without the CARES funding.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley, states play a supporting and key role in the CSBG program. What improvements at the state level do you see need to be done to improve their connection and the involvement in the CSBG program?
Thank you for that question. I think it boils down to just a few key areas. Number one, the flow of funds, the distribution of community services block grant funds has been an issue in the past. It seems to be one of the last programs that HHS releases, and a lot of times the states are slow in getting it down to the agencies. And when funding is scarce or delayed, that creates some complications to the operation of the Community Action Agency. So the first thing is to ensure a timely distribution of community services block grant funding. That's number one. Number two, a robust review of agency plans that agencies submit to the state every year, and a robust review of state plans to HHS. By that, I mean HHS approves or disapproves state plans. Three, the Innovation Fund, which is now federally, there is a lot of innovation going on in every state. And I would encourage the states to use their discretionary program within CSBG to create new partnerships, to look at innovative things outside of necessarily Washington, the small pot of money we're creating there. And finally, if there's one other thing that the states could do, and that is take advantage of this network. I mentioned very briefly in my opening about what Governor DeWine did. I didn't have a chance to met in Ohio on the mortgage and rental assistance. Didn't have a chance to mention what the founder of Quicken Loans is doing with the agency in Detroit. This is a resource. This can be very, very helpful on dealing with multitude of state problems. Take advantage of the opportunity that community services block grant in this network. Not enough states do that in terms of big items confronting low-income communities.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Murbayan. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Dr. Fox, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mr. Carter, as you shared in your testimony, there are more than 80 federal means-tested welfare programs. Many of these programs are poorly targeted or overlap with other programs. What steps do you think Congress should take to avoid program duplication and to maximize taxpayer dollars so that they are more effectively helping economically vulnerable individuals?
Representative Fox, thanks for the question. I begin my answer by saying, again, it needs to begin with intention. If we were to take a step back and look at all of these programs in the aggregate, and first have a shared objective, and then be able to look at, from that shared objective, what those individual programs and assets are, it would then allow us to reduce duplication and connect the dots of those programs so that they could all support that shared objective of growing capacity to reduce dependency. So instead of taking the worm's eye view that we have had to create individual programs that look at individual conditions, let's step back and say it is our intention to grow the capacity to reduce dependency of our society. And then what are the tools in the toolbox that we need to do that? And it would allow us to reduce duplication and better target those resources to those families that best need it.
You know, it's pretty ironic that there's very little emphasis put on the fact that this program was started under President Johnson, and that we have more people in poverty now than we had then. You know, nothing seems to be working. We're spending trillions of dollars, and yet we're totally ineffective. And it's a shame. It really is a shame at how much money we are taking away from those who work hard in this country and spend on totally ineffective programs. Mr. Carter, yeah, you mentioned this in your answer to me, but how could we better integrate the safety net programs with workforce preparation to ensure that low-income Americans are able to move up the economic ladder and not just be recipients of welfare all their life? Work has dignity, work has meaning. What can we do better for workforce preparedness?
We can better enable connectivity. One of the main challenges of design and operation of the safety net is that there isn't a mechanism to connect one program to another. And so therefore, you have a Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, okay, which is about addressing getting everybody into the labor force and skilling people up. But it doesn't have a mechanism that it can connect to, let's say, the TANF program or other supports or other work supports. So the main thing that Congress could do is create a mechanism to connect programs that will allow us to achieve a common objective.
Great. Well, I thank you very much for the work you're doing and for bringing the perspective that you're bringing to this effort. Again, I think what we all should want is to have effective outcomes. And I noticed Mr. Bradley said we should have robust review programs at the state level. Well, review does nothing if you don't have results and if you don't have consequences to those reviews. So it doesn't matter if you review a lot. Words mean nothing. You need action. So when you have programs that aren't working, again, it doesn't do any good to just review them and say they're not working. Then you should defund those programs that aren't working. You should open these programs up to other people who can do something. We are selling the American, we're telling them that these programs are going to help them, and then they don't do anything to help them. And again, we're taking money from hardworking taxpayers and just wasting it. And that is a sin. It is a true, true sin. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Fox. I now recognize Representative Bowman for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. In my district, the Yonkers Community Action Program does incredible work to support low-income families using CSBG funds. This year alone, they delivered over 125,000 pounds of food and assisted nearly 2,600 families experiencing food insecurity. Organizations like YCAP have been essential during the pandemic, when many low-income families, especially Black and Brown families, are dealing with job loss, lack of access to affordable health care, and rising food prices. It's clear that we have to increase funding for CAAs across the country and help them better serve their communities by addressing out-of-date income eligibility requirements that don't reflect the true cost of living, which continues to rise each year. Ms. Scott Chandler, I'd like to ask specifically about the work your organization is doing to help low-income families confronted with the effects of climate change. Hurricane Ida recently devastated communities in my district in the Bronx and Westchester, and low-income families were hit the hardest. Basements and homes flooded, cars washed away, and dozens of people were killed across the state. For families living paycheck to paycheck, recovering from climate disasters can be nearly impossible. And even when we aren't dealing with massive climate-related storms like Ida, low-income families are increasingly experiencing unaffordable utility bills that prevent them from escaping the cycle of poverty as a result of climate change. How can CAAs leverage CSBG funds to protect low-income families from the effects of climate change that perpetuate poverty and ensure climate resiliency for these communities that are often hardest hit by climate disasters? Specifically for CAAs that have not yet fully engaged with the effects of climate change in their communities, how should they approach this work?
Thank you. Well, I think we have been working in this area indirectly for many years because many years ago, CSBG allowed us the flexibility to develop innovative partnerships with public utility companies and develop an energy conservation program that was initially launched with another organization as a pilot and now involves all of the CAAs across Massachusetts and over $100 million in utility funding. The program provides leading edge heating system replacement, renewable energy resources, weatherization to thousands of households annually across the state. And it's a complement to the much smaller federally funded energy programs, but it's become a national model. And I mention those because, as you said, low-income families, families of color, energy costs, a broken boiler and furnace, not only is a disaster for their heating their homes, but it is really a financial burden that they can't, one more thing they can't deal with. And so we've been able to be on the ground replacing boilers, giving appliances, changing out lighting, things that can save money and also contribute to demand reduction. And it's available for tenants and their landlords, as well as low-income homeowners, as an emergency response, as well as the broader, longer-term climate, energy efficiency, and demand reduction. We also have been working with.
I'm sorry, I just want to reclaim my time. I got one more question. Thank you for that. That was a great answer. Ms. King Galion, in your testimony, you spoke about how your organization takes a holistic and interagency approach to addressing poverty, because no single poverty or intervention can end poverty on its own, which I agree with. Instead, we need a cohesive system of support and intervention that addresses all aspects of the experiences, causes, and consequences of poverty in our communities. I think this is especially true during and in the aftermath of national emergencies like the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected low-income communities, not only in terms of physical and economic health and safety, but also socio-emotional health. How can CSBG funds be used to promote coordination in providing high-quality, holistic mental health supports and violence prevention programming for low-income communities across the country?
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That's an excellent question. So two examples actually of how we do that here with CSBG in Washington County is, one, our community health needs assessment identified that one of the driving causes of our high suicide rate was economic stressors. So we use CSBG to ensure that we have staffing embedded in our mental health crisis clinic to connect people to resources as they're accessing their mental health supports. And two, we do the similar thing with our Family Justice Center. So when folks are accessing domestic violence supports and court supports, they're able to get their economic needs met as well. And we lean into the strengths of our partners, and we each do what we do best.
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back. Sorry for going over time.
Thank you, Representative. I now recognize Representative McLean for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Carter, poverty is a huge issue in this country. There's no denying that. And I think we all are concerned about this and are concerned about raising people up out of poverty. But equally concerning is the high level of unemployment and the rate that the unemployment is, in addition to the available jobs that are not being filled. I'm just wondering if instead of throwing money at the problem as a means of a solution, do you think we also need to encourage self-sufficiency for those obviously who are able, and really tie the two together to help people and individuals get lifted out of poverty? My question is, how can we ensure that we are how can we ensure that we are encouraging and providing Americans with the resources to become self-sufficient? And how do we help them transition out of poverty into the workforce?
So thanks for the question. Again, it begins with intention. And what I mean by that is right now, we have the intention to provide the benefit, good, or service. I think that the way the system should operate is after we have immediately addressed the crisis, whether that crisis be feeding or housing or cash, we ought to immediately pivot to, okay, you're here today because you are in crisis. What it is our objective, our societal objective to do is to help you grow beyond that crisis. So we're going to pivot from that to an intentional plan to help you grow beyond this moment. And then bringing together the supportive benefits, goods, and services, and measure the movement of that individual or that family from that crisis to self-sufficiency.
Wonderful. I think a concern that every American is having is ensuring their tax dollars are being spent efficiently and effectively. So to piggyback on your point, how can we incorporate at all, or can we incorporate the private sector to help fight poverty, to ensure really an all hands on deck approach to make sure that that's being done rather than solely relying on the government? I like that public-private partnership.
We absolutely have to do that. And here in Tennessee, we are taking a very unique approach where we are reaching to all the different sectors, the private sector, the community of faith, academia, philanthropy, the service sector, to come together to take a whole of Tennessee approach to this notion of growing capacity to reduce dependency. We have become too reliant on the government being the sole problem solver here. And what I think is that government ought to serve as a catalyst to bring the rest of the society to solving the problem, to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
Mr. Carter, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And if we have the government working in conjunction with the private sector, I think that's a recipe for success. I'm going to switch gears for just a moment. The current formula for how states receive the funds have not been updated since 1975, and obviously a lot has changed. Just even in the types of jobs that are available. Do you see a need for the update in the formula at all? Do you think that would help in terms of where the resources are funneled?
I don't know. I haven't had the opportunity recently to review the formula, so I don't know that I would have an opinion on whether or not the formula needs to be changed. I do think that David Bradley made some good points about the efficiency of making the dollars available, because it passes from federal to state to local, and we could more efficiently move the dollars to get them to the agencies to serve. But I'm not certain that that beyond that small state allocation that Mr. Bradley also spoke to, I'm not sure that a change in the allocation is that I have a.
Yeah, I'm more concerned in my question is we haven't updated the formula in 4 decades. And a lot has changed. And I'm just wondering, if we updated the formula, would that not help who it goes to? But then also, to your point, maybe if we updated the formula, it would get to those in need quicker. I just want to make sure, to your point, that we're using our dollars effectively, but we're also getting them to the right person right individual in a timely fashion.
I would just say that it's always value added to review and update the mechanism. So a look at the allocation formula would certainly be in the best interest of modernizing the program.
Thank you, Mr. Carter, and thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back my time.
Thank you. Now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Representative Scott from Virginia. You're recognized for 5 minutes for your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Fulcher for having the hearing. I'm very familiar with community action agencies. The last summer, while I was in law school, I worked at a community action agency in my hometown as a counselor with the Neighborhood Youth Corps. And I was in college in the late 60s and early 70s in the Boston area. So I'm very familiar with the good work of ABCD. The COVID-19 pandemic put us on a strain on so many people and so many communities as we look to get back not only to normal, but actually improve economic stability of families. The conversation about community action agencies could not be more important. I want to just briefly recognize one issue that's been discussed here, and that is the important role of faith-based organizations as trusted community partners of CSBG and other federal programs. The bill, as it's written, allows participation of faith-based organizations. And make no mistake about that, they still participate. But as good stewards of federal dollars, we have to ensure that federal funding is used in a manner that comports with federal civil rights laws and the Constitution. So I want to thank Ms. Bonamici, Mr. Thompson, and the bipartisan co-sponsors for their work in modernizing and strengthening the CSBG program. Ms. Scott Chandler, one of the issues that we've been dealing with in getting families back to work have been job training and childcare. How does ABCD help families get back to work, particularly making it possible for these programs to be available.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. Through ABCD's experience with workforce development and early childhood programs both, we know firsthand that in order for people to get jobs and maintain jobs, they must have childcare. It's pretty simple, and particularly for our working moms. 3 years ago, we were able to pilot a program that leveraging CSBG dollars and our childcare voucher subsidy management program through a demonstration grant from the Department of Labor. And the program utilized a model of bundled vouchers in which it combined immediate access to education for the in-demand jobs industry and childcare for job-seeking moms. And our workforce preparedness partners, our employers, and childcare providers work together to facilitate people getting the skills and getting the jobs, and then feeling secure that their children were in a space that's nurturing. It represents some of the system change and connectedness that has been talked about today. And CSBG is really undergirding those kind of ideas and those kind of innovative programs we've been able to do.
Thank you. Ms. Gillian, given the dramatic impact of COVID-19 on American households, Congress provided supplemental appropriations for energy assistance, and the American Rescue Plan had significant funding for LIHEAP. Can you tell me how the community action agencies were able to help in distributing the money under LIHEAP so that the money actually got to where it needed to go?
Absolutely. So with the LIHEAP increase, we were able to serve more people, to be more aggressive in our outreach, and increase the standard payment, which meant that we were able to reduce the number of repeat applications, which meant we were able to serve people more efficiently. And with our specific targeted outreach and our expanded network of partner organizations and increased capacity in those organizations as well, we were able to get deeper and broader into our most isolated and vulnerable communities. And because of CSBG, we have a mantra kind of within our staff that is person-centered, fund-blind, and make people whole. So we're able to combine not just LIHEAP, but all of the other investments to meet the needs of the individual person, rather than focus specifically on a single fund.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley, do you have any comments to make on the composition of boards of directors?
Yeah, I think our board of directors is one of the absolute strengths of this program. The 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 local elected officials, 1/3 low-income representatives, and 1/3 from the community, which includes faith-based. 2/3 of our agencies have faith organizations on their board. There is not another institution in a community that has all the segments of the society at the table on that. So I think the board is a strength. We want to continue to make sure that the board is engaged, which they are. They review the strategic plans, which they do, and they ensure the fiscal accountability and of the agency, which is ongoing. Board of directors is one of the hallmarks, tripartite board of this program.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Now you're back.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. I now recognize Representative Comer, who I understand is trying to connect, one of our co-sponsors of the legislation. Representative Comer, are you available? Oh, he's available. It says Sarah, but it is Representative Comer. You just disappeared again, Representative. Okay, you're gonna have to unmute. You do need to unmute. There you go.
All right, thank you.
Terrific. Now we can hear
Madam.
you. You're recognized for 5 minutes for your question.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I want to address my question to my friend David Bradley. And let me say, I appreciate all that you do, sir, for community action in Kentucky. You make a huge difference in my congressional district, and look forward to working with you in the future. Mr. Bradley, can you speak of some of the ways community action agencies have helped connect individuals to local resources and find steady employment during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah. Yeah, yes, I can. Thank you for the question. Thanks for your support for the program. You know, we were talking earlier about a discussion about connectivity. Well, that's what you have community action agencies for. Their relationship with workforce, either serving on the board or vice versa. Their ongoing partnership with so many other nonprofits and private sector in the community is second to none. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of partnerships in this community, that help, that address employment and helping people move up that ladder to opportunity and self-sufficiency. What we've learned over time is that it takes fighting poverty or addressing poverty is complex, and it takes partnerships. And this program prides itself on the partnerships necessary to get people employed, to get people back on their feet, and to get people hope and opportunity.
Absolutely. And were there additional flexibilities needed to serve these individuals, or did the programs work as intended, allowing local communities to meet their needs in the community?
Yeah, the CARES Act gave $1 billion, which is a lot of money to the Community Services Block Grant. So that was the first big COVID relief package out there. And there was also $1 billion provided in ARA in 08, 9, and 10, that during that time period. And we learned some lessons from that. Number one, the 200% is important because, again, as I said earlier, it's that family that's above 125 that are just falling, have just been laid off, just falling into poverty, that someone has to be that catch. Someone has to help them, stop them from falling and give them an opportunity to get back on their feet. So the $1 billion was used extremely well. If I had criticisms of that, it is, number one, the slowness in some states in getting the money down locally. That was a big issue. And months after months after months, waiting on states to release the money. We would hear that, well, only 20% or 30% of the money has been spent in this state. That's because the money didn't arrive on time. So that's number one. And two, not every state allowed 200% eligibility. And I think that hurt the response to COVID. Generally speaking, though, HHS, vast majority of states, certainly the vast majority of local agencies, really stepped up to the plate and were the first in their community in providing assistance to the twin crises of the pandemic and the economic crisis as well.
Well, Mr. Bradley, again, thank you for all the work you do for community action in Kentucky. And Chairwoman Bonamucci, thank you for allowing me to waive on this subcommittee. Mr. Bradley, if there's anything that we can do legislatively to help, I've worked with Chairwoman Bonamucci in a bipartisan way in the past, and we want to continue to work with you. You make a huge difference in our communities, for particularly with low-income people who are trying to take that step from welfare to work. And I appreciate that, and anything we can do to help you moving forward, we'll certainly do that. But thank you for your work in the past. And Chairwoman, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Representative Comer. And I do not see other members to ask questions. So thank you again to all of our witnesses and to the members for your questions. Pursuant to committee practice, materials for submission to the hearing record must be submitted to the committee clerk within 14 days following the last day of the hearing. So by close of business on November 17th, preferably in Microsoft Word format. Only a member of the subcommittee or an invited witness may submit materials for inclusion in the hearing record. The materials must address the subject matter of the hearing. Please submit materials to the committee clerk electronically by emailing submissions to edmlabor.hearings@mail.house.gov. Again, thank you to the witnesses. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you, and we ask that you please respond to these questions in writing. The hearing record will be held open for 14 days to receive these responses. I do remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, witness questions for the hearing must be submitted to the majority committee staff or committee clerk within 7 days. The questions submitted must also address the subject matter of the hearing. And I now recognize the ranking member, Representative Fulcher, for a closing statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a letter from the Ethics and Public Policy Center that I'd like to submit for the record that explains why it's crucial for existing legal protections for faith-based providers to remain in place. So with the permission of the committee, I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I'd be remiss if I didn't just remind everyone that the obvious omission of the Modernization Act, CSBG Modernization Act, is the removal of faith-based organizations from financial participation in the program. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say, well, they can participate, but just not financially. And so I just wanted to point that out. There's over 19,000 that are participating today. Why would we want to take that away? These faith-based organizations are uniquely positioned to serve. They have a culture and a heart for this, and by their very nature, they care. And to remove them, Madam Chair and members of the committee, to remove them from financial participation is a critical blow to the program and to the people that it serves. And so, Madam Chair, there's only upside in allowing that continuation for faith-based organizations. I just encourage everyone to support that in this CSBG Modernization Act. Madam Chair, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Fulcher. I now recognize myself for purpose of making my closing statement. I want to start by saying this is a bipartisan legislation with no intention of removing faith-based organizations from participation, as Chairman Scott mentioned. Once again, I want to thank our expert witnesses for being with us today. Your compelling testimony paints a clear picture of the central role of the Community Service Block Grant Program and the role that it plays in addressing poverty in our communities. As we heard today, each year, CSBG and the community action agencies it supports helps millions of individuals and families in need access important services and take critical steps to achieve economic security. These services and supports are unique to each community. They are locally driven because those living in a particular community are best suited to address the needs of their community. With continued federal support, these local organizations and their committed staffs can continue to effectively reduce poverty in communities across the United States. The demand for strong local action remains extremely high as we continue to recover from COVID-19. Right now, CSBG-funded organizations across the country are conducting vaccine outreach, helping low-income families stay in their homes, and other important work. The CSBG program has a long legacy of reducing poverty in our communities, but we must not neglect the program's future. It's been more than 2 decades since CSBG was last reauthorized. Today, we have a valuable opportunity to reinvigorate our bipartisan commitment to ending poverty, and I look forward to working to advance this important legislation that will improve the lives of Americans in need through community